Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Anyone have stories revolving around standing stones? An Armenian friend of mine lived not far from a standing stone. I googled it. They call them Vishpakar. So he said. Often on long walks with his dog, he would come within view of one, and he said that his dog would always linger as they passed and gaze at it, then carry on. It was years later that one afternoon, when the dog was quite aged, it appeared he wanted to go outside. Yet when let out, the dog simply went straight for the site of the standing stone and sat at its base, eyes fixed at something carved into the stone, quite calmly passing many minutes, until my friend said became impatient. My friend said that he couldn't get the dog to leave, and figured he would leave it there. It knew its way home. Apparently it stayed there, and in the evening when my friend returned, he reported the dog was still there, yet the following morning it was gone, never returned.
In a way, yes. Not the small rings like OP's pick, but much larger, say quarter of a mile. I live on Whidbey Island in Washington State. I'm a caretaker for a load of vacation rentals and summer houses. There's an area here that never fails to bring goosebumps to my skin. It's a clearing in a woods a bit wider than a quarter of a mile, but ringed with 7 large boulders. They vary in size, with the smallest being an 8-foot hemisphere and the largest maybe 20. They are all hemispheres in shape, not toothy like the pick. This clearing is weird beyond words. It's just kinda off tilt. The grass here is rough and you can almost see these weird grains in them similar to wood. The area is eerily quiet for such a verdant area. There's never birds to be seen or heard, or flying bugs either. But there are slugs galore. We are known for our large banana slugs around here, but these are a bit bigger and the colors are weird. They also appear to be a bit misshapen, and I've seen some with bleeding ulcer-like wounds. But the weirdest thing for me is the taste smell of the place. It tastes like biting aluminum foil, or how a screeching chalkboard would taste. Forgive that simile, it's the best way I can describe the weirdness. Anyway, the last time I was here was about 2 weeks ago. It was right after July 4th and it was pretty nice out. 70-some odd degrees, 5 miles per hour wind from the ocean and not a cloud in the sky. It doesn't get much better than this for working weather. I was mowing a lawn for one of my out-of-town clients that has property at the edge of this clearing. I wear ear protection while mowing, but I kept thinking I was hearing things like shouts or hoots maybe. I'd stop the mower and take off my muffs and look around, but heard and saw nothing. About halfway done, I noticed a buzzing sound but attributed it to fatigue from the muffs or mower. It steadily increased in intensity and volume, and then it suddenly jumped in intensity and volume. My teeth hurt and my vision swam and I got very nauseous and fell to my knees. I tore off the earmuffs and tried driving my pinkies into my ear canals to shut out the sensation. My eyes were crying like waterworks, and then I heaved violently, getting rid of all my breakfast. And then I passed out. I was out for 10 minutes tops. When I awoke, I was spooning with the smallest of the boulders. My chin and shirt were covered in my own vomit. My pants were wet from the morning dew and my hands were all scratched up. I cleared my head after a time and caught my bearings. My earmuffs and the mower were where I remembered them being last, on my client's property. I could see the meandering path that I had made crawling towards the boulder. It was at least 200 yards and over some very rough bracken. So that's it. I got up, loaded my truck, and left the job unfinished. I called the client and gave a lame excuse that I couldn't work for him anymore. In this weird tone, all he said was, "I understand and I won't hold it against you. Are you okay to drive?"
Be on a gap year in Europe. Hiking in Brittany in Paimpont Forest, look it up. Do a poor job with directions on a hike. Sundown is approaching, kinda in a hurry to get back. See some girl walking and stop near a brook. She's gorgeous with curly tresses of blonde hair with freckles in a simple white dress. I approach and wave, try some shitty French. She smiles at me and continues on her way. I don't know why, but I follow. Like for 10 goddamn minutes. Weird in retrospect, I mean shit. Who does that? I did, that's who. No wonder she just kept going. She climbs a small hill, out of sight. I reach the crest of a hill. Large, tall rock standing in a small meadow below. Not actually that impressive at the time. The girl walks behind a stone. I begin to approach the stone. I am standing in its shadow. The sun is falling directly behind it. Notice lots of birds in the trees kinda eyeing me, as in 40 sparrows or swallows or whatever. None of them are chirping. Notice the wind isn't blowing. Don't see that girl anymore, get goosebumps. Turned around. The park ranger type guy intercepts me after a while. Tells me I shouldn't be here or some shit. Get let out and leave. My feels when I probably narrowly avoided being in the news, if you know what I mean.
I live in the more rural part of Germany, not far from the Wartburg where the Reformation started. We got a lot of old shit here in the woods, also a lot of old border stones, standing stones for every type of shit that happened. Man killed by bear 200 years ago means a stone in that place for 200 years, this kind of stuff. My dog simply used them as a piss spot. But we got to one area where he went bonkers. After telling some people about it, I heard that in that special area a small village was located until it was devastated in the 30 Years' War. My dog was really freaking out in that place.
Interesting. Did you try metal detecting or do a little search of the area to find artifacts?
Right on cue, already did that with a friend, but in a different area where a big battle happened long ago. Battle of Forchheim. We found nothing, but it is a special story about that devastated village. The bell of the church from that village was dropped in the village's well when it was raised. The legend says that you can hear it in November, and sometimes hear a ring, which can become awkward when you are in the woods and hear some bells ring because the wind carries distant sounds. There are also some witch stones in my area where they burned witches in the Dark Ages. On spot is roughly half a kilometer behind my house.
The Nine Stane Rig, aka the Nine Stane Stone Circle or the Nine Stane Rig, is nestled among trees in the borderlands between Scotland and England. The prehistoric stones are thought to have been erected as a calendar for local farmers, telling them when to plant their crops by measuring the movement of the moon against the circle. Later, it became a cairn, and that's where the creepy part comes in. The circle is only a few miles away from the now-abandoned Hermitage Castle. According to local legend, the castle was once home to William de Sully, or de Sul, the second inhabitant of the castle. The 13th century lord was popularly known as Bad Lord Soulis and occasionally as Terrible William. With those nicknames, it's no surprise that the stories told about him include his penchant for practicing black magic. It was a pastime that necessitated the torture and murder of local children, whom he kidnapped and killed in the dungeons of the castle. At first, the locals could do little to stop him, as he was under the protection of a spirit familiar named Robin Redcap. When de Sully sold his soul to the devil, he gained the protection of Redcap, and was promised that the only thing that could ever kill him was a rope made of sand. He made no secret of that fact, so the townsfolk recruited the help of a wizard of their own, Thomas of Ercildoorn. While the wizard created a sand-filled lead belt, the townsfolk revolted against their lord. They stormed the castle and dragged him to the nearby Nine Stane Rig. A cauldron was waiting for him, and they bound him with the magic belt, rolled him up in a sheet of lead, and melted him down. Both Hermitage Castle and the Nine Stane Stone Circle are supposedly still haunted by the spirit of Bad Lord Soulis, and people have claimed to still hear the screams of the children he murdered for his black rites and rituals.
My family went to a city in the interior of the country for a party that the city have every year for some Catholic saint. There is a city monument called the Standing Stone, which is just a large rock that is propped up. The monument is about 5 mins away from the actual city in the middle of a wooded area. I don't know the term in English, but it is a dense caatinga vegetation. Cousin, 14 at the time, decides to go alone to the monument. A few moments later, he comes back crying and with his hands and arms covered in blood. They wash him, but don't find a single scratch. When he stops crying, he says that when he got to the monument, he put both of his hands on the stone. After that, he could not let go of the stone and felt that the stone was very cold, and told that the stone was red and had blood leaking from it. He said that somehow he was able to get off the stone and run straight back to us. I had never seen him cry. He was crying like a young child. The next day in the morning, 2 of my uncles go to the monument to check things. Stone is completely normal. Gray just like it always has been, no signs of blood anywhere. They go to the church to talk with the local padre. The padre says that a long time ago the stone was where people used to tie people to whip them, but no one from here had ever had any similar experience. That same year, the sister of my grandmother that lived in the city died and we never went back there.
According to legend, the standing stones of Callanish, or Callanay, were buried beneath the earth until years ago, when a local farmer was walking the island while he looked for rocks to build a wall with. He came across what he thought was a single small stone, but when he started to dig, he found that the rock kept going. He dug deeper and deeper and eventually uncovered the ancient stone circle. Regardless of whether or not they were ever uncovered by what had to be the most determined farmer in Scotland, excavations of the stones have allowed them to be dated to somewhere between 2900 and 2600 BC, and they were a center of activity for somewhere between 1000 and 1500 years. At that point, it seems that a central circle of stones was destroyed, and the rest of the area was covered in peat in what might have been some sort of ritual cleansing. In 1857, the peat was cut to reveal the stones once more, perhaps leading to their origin story. The stones have an odd alignment. It's been found that every 18 years, the moon is low enough in the sky that it appears to float across the tops of the stones. The Callanish stone's Gaelic name is Fir Bray, which translates to the false men. Like many of the Neolithic stone monuments, this one also has a bit of Christian mythology and folklore attached to its supposed creation. Legend says that the stones were once men, occasionally referred to as giants, who were visited by St. Ciaran. The missionary tried to convert them to Christianity, but when they kept refusing, they were turned into the stones that still stand on the isle.
I've always wondered about these straight-line theories. They supposedly occur with regard to Viking stone monuments and ancient forts, as well as Stonehenge-style standing stone monuments across Europe, etc. I always thought maybe it was people just trying to literally connect the dots and not bothering to actually measure after they get excited by a seemingly straight line. I've always wanted to sit and measure them myself, because I wonder what the deviation on these lines is. If they are actually on 100% straight lines, that would be some crazy shit, and to me, better evidence of ley lines and ancient peoples having knowledge of them than a global civilization.
The legend of the Rollright stones is an old one, first written down in 1586. There was an ancient king who decided that he wanted to claim all of England for himself and unite the country under his rule. So he prepared his troops for battle and started marching. When he reached Oxfordshire, he found a witch standing in his way. According to some versions, the witch was the infamous seer, Mother Shipton. The witch told him, 7 long strides shalt thou take, and if Long Compton thou canst see, King of England thou shalt be. The king, thrilled by the idea, took his 7 strides. As his foot hit the ground on the 7th step, the earth rose up and blocked his view, condemning him and his men. The king was turned into what's now known as the Kingstone, while his loyal men make up the Kingsmen stone circle that stands around him. Other standing stones are said to be the Whispering Knights, all that remains of his less than loyal servants, who stood whispering behind his back as he strode on to what he thought was fortune and glory. The men don't always remain as stone, though. It's said that when midnight strikes, the stones briefly come to life. Some leave their place on the hill and go down to a nearby spring to get a drink, while others join hands and dance in a circle. Anyone unfortunate enough to be caught in the area when it happens pays with their life or their sanity. Some also say that the fairies that live beneath the stone circle come up and dance with the knights at midnight, and anyone who damages the stones or takes pieces away with them will pay the ultimate price. For those who respect the stones, though, there are different legends. When young women listen closely to the stones, they're said to hear the name of the man they will marry. A long-time gathering place for the witches of nearby Long Compton, the Rollright stones remain among the most mysterious of all Britain's standing stones.
There are standing stones in the mountains where I live. When I was a kid, my friends and I found an altar in that area, with bones and animal skulls. I remember being terrified. I went back for a proper look last summer with a friend of mine, after talking about it for years. Since I saw the altar as a child, everything looks completely different, and the entire place is overgrown with gorse. The stones are spaced about 15 to 20 meters apart, and we could see about 3 or 4 different paths they made. We followed one path to what looked like a collapsed Mesolithic portal tomb. Everyone who lives on that side of the mountain is a little tapped. The old fellas will tell you about devil worshippers who practiced where I'm talking about. Livestock would go missing every once in a while, and the locals would say were being stolen for rituals. Also, one of the old fellas told me that when he was a child he was kidnapped by a dwarf, and it buried him vertically head first. I'm inclined to believe him, as he was very upset while talking about it.
There are 3 individual stone circles in Stanton Drew. The largest of the circles, known as the Great Circle, has 26 stones that have survived since the Bronze Age. The Cove has 11 stones remaining, and the Northeast Circle still has 8 stones. The first records of them only date from 1664, and it wasn't until 1776 that they were completely mapped. The most widely told tale about the stones is a story applied to a distinctly ancient site. One Saturday, ages ago, a wedding was being held in the Somerset countryside. After the wedding, of course, came the feast. As the day turned into night and midnight approached, everyone was having so much fun that they forgot about the approaching Sabbath. As the clock struck midnight, the wedding's fiddler stopped playing and refused to continue, even when the bride demanded that the party keep going, even if she had to go to hell to find a fiddler. Once she started throwing words like that around, the devil himself showed up. Bearing a fiddle of his own, he played and played, faster and faster, until dawn. When the sun rose, everyone had been turned to stone. The Great Circle and the Northeast Circle are made up of the wedding guests, while the standing stones of the Cove are the parson and the ill-fated bride and groom. Later, the fiddler who refused to play past midnight was found among the stones, and the legend is said to come from his recounting of the tale. The devil left with the souls of the entire wedding party, except the fiddlers, and he also left with a promise that day. He'd be back to play for them again.
Churn milk. Joan, see the picture. This is a standing stone right on the moor a little way from the village I live in. Round here, the villages are fairly isolated, hanging right at the fringes of barren moorland. Story goes that a young girl called Joan was carrying milk over the moors to deliver to the villages when she was caught in a snowstorm. Of course, there are a lot of different versions of the story, but in the end, she gets turned into the stone where she dies. There's a little hollow in the top of the stone that people all leave coins and other similar offerings in. It's most likely that this is because in the past, it was used as a plague stone. People would transfer goods and money there by leaving it at the stone to avoid coming into contact with someone who had the plague, but the hippies round here say it's to appease moorland spirits. It's also supposed to spin round 3 times on New Year's Eve when the bells of the church in Mythamroyd down in the valley chime, which I guess has hefty themes of rebirth, etc., as well as the more obvious churning idea. There's a poem about it as well from a famous local poet, a lonely stone, afloat in the stone heavings of emptiness. Keeps telling her tale. Foxes killed her. You take the coins out of the hollow in the top of it. Put your own in. Foxes killed her here. Why just here? Why not 5 yards that way? A squared column planted by careful labor. Sun cannot ease it, though the moors grow warm. Foxes killed her and her milk spilled. Or they did not, and it did not. Maybe. Farmers brought their milk this far, and cottagers from the top of Luddenden Valley left cash, in the stone's crown, probably in vinegar, and the farmers left their change, relic of the plague, churn milk jam. And Joan did not come trudging, through the long swoon of moorland, with her sodden feet, nipped face. Neither snow nor foxes made her lie down, while they did whatever they wanted. The negative of the skylines is blank, only a word wrenched. Then the pain came, and her mouth opened. And now all of us, even this stone, have to be memorials of her futile stumblings and screams and awful death. Churn Milk Joan, Ted Hughes, from the Remains of Elmet, 1979.
Menontoll is also known as the Crick Stone, and it's said that children who are passed back and forth through the hole will be cured of chronic illnesses. It was especially associated with curing rickets. Women who crawled through the stone under the light of the full moon would become fertile and soon become pregnant. It's also said that anyone who puts 2 brass pins on the top of the holed rock and asks yes or no questions will have those questions answered by the movement of the pins, although it's not clear what means yes and what means no. Most of the phenomena credited to Menontoll are said to be the work of a guardian fairy that lives at the stones. While many fairies were evil tricksters, the Menontoll fairy is a good one, thought to be able to both cure illness and undo the work of more diabolical fairies. Belief in changelings was a very real thing in Cornwall for a surprising amount of time. People believed that fairies would steal a newborn human child and replace it with one of their own offspring. As the changeling grew up, it would become more disturbed and less like the human it appeared to be. Sometime between 1830 and 1860, a child suspected of being a changeling passed through the hole. It was thought that the good fairy would be able to return the human child to the family that it had been stolen from. Part of the problem in determining what the stone was for is the fact that we have no idea what it originally looked like. It's believed that the stones still standing aren't in their original position, and that they were once a part of a larger stone circle, the remnants of which are still buried beneath the ground.
Dated to be around 3,500 years old, the stone circle known as Long Meg and her daughters is the second largest in England. The monument is comprised of 59 stones, though it's believed that there were originally as many as 77 as well as 2 cairns, which have disappeared. The tallest stone is known as Long Meg, which stands 3.8 meters tall and is positioned outside the circle itself. It's said that Meg refers to a local witch known as Meg of Meldon, who was turned to stone for disrespecting the sanctity of the Sabbath and dancing on the sacred day. The smaller stones are her daughters, or her coven, who joined her in her sacrilegious dance. One version of the story states that legendary Scottish wizard Michael Scott turned the coven to stone. Scott was a real person. He was a monk and scholar whose work in astronomy, the occult, and demonology, along with his ability to read and speak languages like Arabic and Greek, turned him into someone who walked the line between magician, monk, and witch himself. Like a number of stone circles across Britain, it's claimed to be impossible to accurately count all the stones. This is good because if anyone ever succeeded, it would break Scott's spell, and the witches would return to the land of the living. Some stories suggest that if a piece of a stone is chipped away, it'll bleed as though it were alive. Legend also says that the stones are quite capable of protecting themselves against anyone who would want to move or destroy them. Sometime in the 1700s, a local man named Colonel Lacey tried to blow up the stones in the circle, likely thinking that he was going to find the buried treasure sometimes said to be beneath them. A terrible storm tore through the area, thwarting his plans and making it clear that the circle had powerful protectors.
Maeve's Cairn is reputed to be the final resting place of Connaught's Queen Maeve, the warrior queen who was given Connemara by her father. When she was comparing her wealth to that of one of her husbands, the discovery of the only thing he had that she lacked, a bull of equal quality, led to the epic story of the cattle raid of Cooley, one of many stories told about battles between Maeve and her neighbors. Tradition states that when Maeve was buried in the cairn on Knocknaria, she was buried standing and fully armored with her spear in her hand, facing the direction of her enemies from Ulster. Buried in the other cairns are some of her most important warriors and others who had taken a stand for Connemara. The warrior Jogan Bell was buried in Rathofiacrach, which was likely Knocknaria, and he too was buried standing facing Ulster with his spear in his hand. After Bell's death, the men of Connaught continuously seemed to have the upper hand. When the Ulstermen found out that their enemies still had the protection of their lord, it's said they raided Bell's burial mound and dug him up. They reburied him elsewhere, upside down. From then on, the battles were more evenly matched.
Stonehenge was created by the refugees of Atlantis to act as an anchor of the light, where all light healers on Earth could connect with. Stonehenge became the center of the light on Earth. Between each standing stone were huge, double-terminated clear quartz crystals that were buried in the ground, and in the center of the circle stood a huge generator clear quartz crystal. Inside each standing stone there are ethereal clear quartz generators. Seen ethereally, light poured into the main generator crystal and then radiated between and through the standing stones out to all corners of the Earth and all the light healers on Earth. In this way, connection was maintained to continue the purpose of restoring light on Earth. Sadly, the non-light found Stonehenge and destroyed all the huge crystals. They then went and killed all the druids and light healers that worked with Stonehenge. This was the end of Stonehenge, and it was a dark time in the history of the light, as now it become very hard to anchor light to Earth. If people wonder how the refugees of Atlantis managed to create Stonehenge itself, they had the ability of light toning, a kind of magic song that is able to lift boulders of any weight into the air and into their intended place on the ground. All they had to do was shape the stones and then lift them into their places through light magic song. Remember that the light magic on Earth had not been blocked yet at this time, so magic was still common practice. The non-light used dark magic and we used light magic.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.